So you lock the windows, you lock the front door, you lock the back door, everything's safe and secure. In fact, you even went the extra step, installed one of these really fancy security locks with a numeric PIN code that somebody has to enter. So you are secure, right? Well, turns out some other guy was hacking around, experimenting with one of these locks, and figured out that if you wave a magnet over this while you're entering this particular PIN code, the whole thing opens up. In fact, he's discovered what we call a zero-day vulnerability. It's called zero-day because that's how much time the manufacturer of this lock had in order to fix it. So now the race is on. Who's going to get this lock fixed, or is he going to be able to break in and get into our business or home before it gets fixed? Okay, what you just saw was a fictitious example in the physical world using a physical device. But let's take a look and see what would happen if we were involving software. And this is an attack on the security of a system. So again, take that zero-day concept and apply it. Well, what does it look like in terms of a timeline, a zero-day timeline? Well, so here we have the release of the software that's involved, so it just generally becomes available. Then there's a point when there's a hack. This is when the hacker discovers that there is a vulnerability that is going to be involved here. So at this point, we have, I would say, bliss. Ignorance is bliss. Nobody knows about the problem up until this point. Here we have awareness. This is when we become aware. First of all, the attacker becomes aware. Then the vendor hopefully becomes aware. And in a case of responsible disclosure, the attacker, or in this case not an attacker, but just the discoverer of the vulnerability, would notify the vendor. And then the vendor could then do what is necessary to apply a patch. Then the public becomes aware of this as well, because at some point, either the attacker, if it's a bad guy, will make this available and report on this, or the vendor will make a patch available and the public will become aware. Then at some point, we move to action. This is where either the patch is made available by the vendor, and then the individuals who have this software need to apply that patch. So those are kind of the phases of this, the sort of ignorance, the awareness, and then the action. Well, let's take a look at what's happening underneath all of this, because what's happening here is there is an underlying vulnerability. So the vulnerability is the weakness in the software, and that started from the very beginning. That was in the software. It was latent. No one knew about it. And that vulnerability continues until the patch is applied to fix it. Now, there's another thing here called an exploit. So what's an exploit? An exploit is what we do to take advantage of this vulnerability. That's the software that an attacker creates that then really exploits this, and that's why it's called that. So the exploit happens a little bit later when the bad guy, or the attacker in this case, could be a good guy if they're going to notify the vendor, but we'll just call them the hacker in this case. The hacker will then notify the vendor or make the exploit themselves and then go take advantage of that. And then finally, there's the attack phase. In this case, we've got an exploit in hand, and the attacks, again, continue until there's an application of the patch. Now notice, in the zero-day case, there is a point in time where the vulnerability exists and no one knows about it, an exploit exists and maybe no one other than the initial attacker knows about it, and that's when it's super dangerous. And then they're launching these attacks. That's when they're starting to break into systems. And the problem is, even if the public becomes aware of this, in some cases, there may not be a whole lot they can do, because if the vendor has not applied or given out this patch, then they've got a vulnerable set of software that they're going to have to deal with. Okay, again, we call that a zero-day because that's how much time the vendor had in order to fix the problem before the problem was in fact being exploited, or at least known and possibly could be exploited. So it's particularly dangerous, and that's why we care about these things. These are the nightmares of security managers. Well, in fact, what's going to make that nightmare even worse is that we describe these issues in terms of something called a CVE. This is a list of common vulnerabilities and exposures. It's a public list, and it's public because we want everyone to know about the problems so that they can fix them. But once something becomes available, it's described in intricate detail, as it should be. Well, someone has discovered that you could take that CVE description, feed it into a large language model using generative AI, your favorite chatbot, for instance, and then it can generate, we know LLMs can generate conversation and text. We know they can write code. Well, guess what? They can also write exploit code. So we could take a CVE, a public description of a problem, feed that into an LLM, and the bad guy doesn't even have to know how to write code. It can be generated for them automatically to take advantage of that 0 day, which shortens our window of protection even less. In fact, there was an experiment done where they were looking at, with GPT, which is one of the large language models, with GPT 3.5, they were able to do this about 0% of the time. Not very successful. However, with GPT-4, they were able to do this on the order of 87% of the time. 87% go from CVE to exploit just like that. That's a problem. Okay, so that you get the idea that this is not just some theoretical threat, I'm going to give you an example of some of the more impactful 0 days that we've seen up to this point. So for instance, one of them, and a lot of lists begin with this one, is called Stuxnet. Stuxnet actually involved using multiple 0 days in order to compromise systems that were specifically designed to operate nuclear centrifuges. So this was a way to sabotage those nuclear centrifuges. It was very controversial, and it was very interesting how this one was even discovered in the first place, because it had been exploited for a while before anyone ever discovered that such a thing had existed. So there was the discovery, then there was the exploit, there was the attack, and then later people started to find out about this. Another really famous or infamous case is the WannaCry virus. Actually, it's ransomware. In this case, WannaCry, spread all over the place. It affected more than 100,000 systems in more than 150 countries. Lots of people got hurt by this. And this is a case, again, where the ransom had to be paid or you're going to lose your data. This was exploiting a 0 day that was in latent software. Heartbleed is another really famous one from the past. Heartbleed took advantage of something called OpenSSL. So it was open software that was created. Lots of people used it in their web servers. But what it would do then is, once the SSL, which was used to encrypt what we now call TLS, transport layer security, encrypt a session going over the internet, if that was encrypted, then you were good. But if it was compromised, which is what the Heartbleed vulnerability and attack took advantage of, well, then your passwords, secret keys, and other information like that now suddenly became vulnerable. And then finally, a very controversial piece of 0 day, in fact, probably involved multiple 0 days, Pegasus. This was basically spyware. And in this case, it was journalists, activists, government officials, all of them their systems were attacked, and people were able to surveil their systems, turn on the microphones, see where people were going, all of that kind of thing, see the messages they were sending, and exfiltrate, in other words, steal the data off of those devices. So this had a very chilling effect on a lot of people who were advocating for free speech and trying to exchange information in a more secure way. So you can see these 0 days, examples hitting OT systems, operational technology, ransomware, an open source utility, and spyware. So 0 days can have a lot of different effects in a lot of different contexts. Now I hope you have an understanding of the problem and the significance of that problem and where the source of it comes from. What can you do about it? Well, as you can imagine, the best thing to do in a lot of these cases is to be able to patch. But if there's no patch available, it's a true 0 day, what are you supposed to do? How can you defend against something you didn't even know existed? Well, there's a lot of things you can do. Like I said, the first and most important is, once you find out that a security fix is available, get those on your systems. There are still lots of cases where some of those 0 days that have long since been patched or patches have been available for them and people have not put them on their system. If they don't put them on their system, then you're still in zero-day land. So make sure you apply the patches. Don't wait. The next thing, some other things you can do until the patch is there, and you should be doing anyway, some of the basic security principles, defense in depth. You never rely on any single security mechanism for all of your security. You have a system of security defenses, and that way all of them have to fail in order for you to be compromised. So you set up a system of these kinds of things. Another one of these well-heeled principles is the principle of least privilege. That is, a system, a user, whatever, should only have access to the minimum number of things, the rights that they would have, the minimum number in order to do the job that they are supposed to do, not one bit more. And as soon as they don't need some of those capabilities, you take them away. That limits your exposure. This is a way of trying to cut down on the attack surface so that if you do get hit, well, the overall impact is minimized. Another thing you can do that's sort of along these same lines is network segmentation. Make sure that you have a way so that you can shut off part of the systems and part of the network if you know that they've been infected, and then that way it doesn't bleed over into the other areas. So this is a good idea to have as well. Some other things, there are some tools that can help in this case. Some of these are very traditional tools, antivirus on all the systems that can support those, so that we can, in fact, sometimes these things will pick up on behaviors as well. Endpoint detection and response systems tend to look more at behaviors, but some of the AV systems will also do that as well. So looking for those kind of anomalous behaviors and shutting those down, even before we know exactly what the nature of the attack is. We just know this system really should not be doing that. Let's stop that in its tracks. And then some other things that we could put on the network, a network intrusion prevention system that's looking for anomalous behaviors at the network layer. So those are some tools you can put in place. Other tools that, and a lot of these are kind of in the prevention, but in this space, we might put a detection tool like a security information and event management system. In fact, maybe I want all of these tools to feed into it so that I can monitor and get a holistic view of my entire system, all of the networks, all of the systems that are on those networks. And then that way I can do a better job of trying to monitor and manage. And then once I find a problem, I need a way to be able to respond and quickly. Security orchestration, automation, and response is the technology we use to do that. It's about incident response, but it's more than that. It's automating the things we can, and it's orchestrating the things that can't be automated. And there's a lot of things that we can't just simply automate in the security space. And then finally, I'm going to say this is extremely important. Intel. Keep yourself educated. Keep your systems up to date. Keep your minds up to date. Make sure your staff is educated. Make sure you're getting information from all the major security sources of vulnerability information. Make sure you're plugged in and have good relationship with your vendors so that when they are applying patches, you're getting those and getting them in. Make sure that you have all of this because information is power, and you need all the power you can get when you're dealing with a 0-day.